say why I have issues with the Apocalypse World initiative? So if you have a situation where some players are a little more shy, then the ones who are more extroverted or who are speaking up, they're going to get all to do everything. Do you see what I mean? And the shyer ones will kind of get pushed.
Characters' actions are more assertive.
Yes.
Okay.
So because with that system, if I say, oh, I'm doing something, well, then there's a role required, right? If I say certain things, right?
Right.
And so as soon as I say something, it initiates a role, and then there's consequences, and so on. And if I'm holding back or something, then I may not get as much play. So and I've seen that actually happen in a couple of games. So
it seems related to what happened in that gray area between unconstructed action, basically talking, looking, poking in the corners, stuff like that, and then the transition into fighting. I usually call it like when I throw my axe, right? And hold on just a second, Alexander. But the idea is at that point in Dungeons and Dragons, again, I really don't mean to pick on D&D here. I'm just going to say some nice things about certain aspects of it in a minute. But but at that moment, people sometimes position themselves by shouting at the table, and therefore getting into an advantageous situation where they're hoping for a bonus or being able to go first or something like that, because they basically shouted their way into saying that they were on top of the rock, and the sort of overwhelming the table with, saying, because we haven't started fighting yet, whatever I say happens. I'm putting myself on top of the rock before we roll for initiative. Stuff like that. I'm sorry, Alexander, what were you
So funny thing, because I saw similar behavior in last few days in both D&D 5th edition game and Apocalypse World game I run. So in D&D, it was like it was obvious that the combat is coming. Like there was an enemy. I was listening to this session, and one guy, which was more talkative and more assertive, shouted something like, "Oh, I do something," and he did. And then the combat started, and the other guys, which weren't so upfront and fast, they had to do it after the initiative, so it will took their action or bonus action or something. In Apocalypse World I run, it was a similar situation. Like the combat was obvious, it will be in a moment. And there was like 3 player characters. So one guy shouted, "Oh, I do this and this," and the others were slower than him, and he wanted to roll. And my solution to this was to stop the action and say, "Okay, you're doing this, and you're in this. Those 2 players, you're in the same time. Like what you do right now, because you have a split second before the hell starts, right?" So it is a similar situation in different system when the rules doesn't say who's first, because it's similarly situational, but players try to take advantage of the being more assertive, faster, being on a better standing with GM or something. Or in case of my friend who played, I think he was taught that if he won't shout, he wouldn't be heard. Yeah, and in case of Apocalypse World, I think it's in the text. It is better stated that GM is responsible for who gets to talk when. Where in D&D, it's not obvious, and because it's not said, the initiative is so important to be in numbers. So the initiative means, okay, the book says who's going when, and in Apocalypse World, it is like you're the MC of the game, and you're responsible for that other players have fun, and that you're fair to them.
Well, in both cases, I think what we're seeing is that once the action starts and people start taking their orders, that both of those are at least pragmatic. I mean, they at least operate. But the gray area right before, are we or aren't we? It's that gray area right before it's like the GM is inhaling. He's about to say roll initiative. Or he's
Yeah.
about to say, okay, you're here, you're here, you're here, and you're here. The GM is inhaling. And that's when a lot of people have learned that's their moment. They've got to position themselves. They can get their action in. They can get the position of advantage. They can do a lot. In fact, they'll do more there before, than anything they'll ever do with a roll. Right? They'll do more there. So it's, or at least more consequentially, right? They'll get more out of saying, what they say. So I think these are actually, this is a pretty good profile of some of the problems that we're going to try to look at other systems that have addressed them. It's a pretty good profile of the problems. And unless anyone wants to bring up any other, aspects of what hasn't worked or that we know we're working against. Herman, are you audible yet?
Am I?
You are.
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Yeah, that's had it set to push to talk for some reason, and
Oh yeah.
I had forgotten to that I did that. Now I was thinking what other systems I've encountered. You have, of course, the simultaneous system like Tunnels and Trolls.
Mm-hmm.
You just roll both sides and figure out what happens fictionally afterwards. So that's one big roll until one side gives up, if I remember right.
Right. Well,
Or loses,
one side
or
eventually runs out of their points.
Runs out of points, or runs away, or so that doesn't have that much of a initiative stuff.
An interesting thing about that Tunnels and Trolls thing is how how much is being determined. Those combat rounds are 3 minutes long, if I remember correctly, in terms of the fiction. And you could, so for those who don't know, you take the dice and the pluses from every single character on your side. And so you'll end up with 15, 16, 17 dice, and you're going to add 23 to the total. So you have to roll them up, count them all out, then add 23. Anyway, the GM has a very similar roll on his side, or her side. A very similar roll. So the GM's doing the same thing. And you end up with a difference. You take the difference in those values, and then you spread them evenly among the losers as damage. So it's incredibly fair in that sense. In the sense of pure player participation, it's incredibly fair. It's not fictionally plausible at all, right? That the damage gets spread evenly across everybody. And it's and also exactly what happened during that turn, those 3 minutes, you just talk it through. You just look at what happened and you say, okay, what just happened so that this happened? And that's it. However, you can opt to get yourself out of the group roll for an individual action. And then there's a mechanism, a system by which you can take individual action. So that's an interesting detail of it. But you're right, there's a whole school of just find out what happened and then we'll go backwards and talk it through. You could even look at things like Bacchanal, right? Where you're beginning of your turn, you just roll a huge handful of dice and say, okay, what's going on, and now what do I do? That's a little bit less in terms of looking at the result. There's no result for the dice. The dice are a setup. There's something similar. My Life with Master, right? Kind of similar. You just have one roll to resolve your scene situation for your character, and maybe another player character is there, and so that person will roll too. But the point is, whatever the dice say, you just look at it and go, well, I guess my axe cuts off the guy's arm. Look at what happened. I guess it just cuts off his arm. And you didn't worry. I mean, you just let the outcomes relative. It's qualitative. There are some which are quantitative. Here's a good one. Marvel Universe, the 2003 game. The one that had these little stones, these little red and white stones. The way it works is you invest in your character's actions secretly, and you put your stones onto the actions that they're going to do. And then everybody reveals, well, whoever has the most stones on a single action, that one comes in first. And then you just work your way down in that order. And so it's interesting that you have some dynamic action, whether it's a roll or whether it's this investment in your stones, whatever it is, and then you reveal, and now they just take place in that order. I picked those two. Matt Snyder's 9 Worlds is the same because you can't change it. Once you see it, you can't change it.
Yeah, same for, I think, Burning Wheel is a similar...
Right. Yeah, you're right. They called it scripted combat, which is a terrible name
combat for one of the... There's also the speedy combat, I think, if you wanted...
What you do is you write down your next 3 actions in order.
Yeah.
And then you look and then you go, right.
What about Dogs in the Vineyard? So with the there is initiative, kinda. Like, usually the person who... It depends on the fiction who starts. But during the conflict, we look at the highest 2 dice. If it's not obvious whose turn would be first, so the highest 2 dice in the next round, this person would be first, and then we go around. Right. No, we go from highest to lowest. But usually, it's similar when I need dice. I spend some like smaller or higher,
right? And
I can pay more lower dice. So take Fallout to keep my higher dice,
right?
And faster in the next round,
right?
Maybe.
So you take a couple of hits so that you can become in harder and faster next time. There are a couple of interesting points about that. First of all, in Dogs in the Vineyard, Vincent went through great pain to tell people, keep just 2 sides in a conflict. You don't have your traditional role-playing situation where everybody is taking very separate roles for their separate actions. A conflict is 2 sides. Throw in on one side or the other to help the primary, or shut up.
Yeah, right. But the book gives this.
People protested the whole time. Yeah.
No, in the book there's this full conflict with more than 2 sides. And he also says that if you want to try again some conflict, then you have to change area, change number of people.
Right.
And that's why I think people do like 2 dogs against 1 person,
right.
Like 2 dogs, and they will win all the time.
Right.
Like,
well, that's the other thing too, is that 2 dogs against 1 person is, and I don't care what they are in that game, they're going to hammer him.
It's doable to fuck them, but yeah.